Anin dinamaganak. Ingejik and Miomayan. Miziakimaguk. Miziakimaguk. Pepa Montang Dizanakas. Kinanakamanak Knama Miomayan. So I'd also like to begin by acknowledging the territory that we're on, which is Treaty 6 territory in the homeland of the Métis. And just very, very honored to be in your presence today, and to have been asked to this gathering, and to really share the energy of each one of you that fills this room, and also very grateful for the beautiful day that we have outside, and for the gift of children that we had today in the bowl, and that's what teaching and learning is all about. Is that also that kind of wonder and excitement that we get to witness and be a part of. Within universities or within elementary and high school settings. And I was also an elementary and high school teacher at one point, and did a short stint as a principal. So my whole life has been in the teaching and learning and student experience realm. And was the oldest of 6 children. I have 5 younger brothers and no sisters, and even that situated me in the space of nurturing and being caregiver of my brothers, and teaching them English, because English isn't my first language. It's the Nakaway language, and I began learning English when I started kindergarten in the nearby provincial school system. And very early on, just was energized by those aha moments that I saw my brothers have whenever I came home with new words, and with my youngest brother, who's 10 years younger than I am, having the responsibility of being sometimes the primary caregiver while my parents were busy doing whatever it was they were, but again, always engaged in showing him things. And we didn't call it teaching at that point, but it was showing him, and it was having him experience the environment, and teaching him about respect, as I was taught about respect by my parents and grandparents. So I think what we learn and what we teach within our educational settings is way more than intellectual learning or knowledge. And from an Indigenous perspective, there is holism to teaching and to learning and to life. So there is that holistic perspective that we like to draw upon, and also to be always cognizant of all my relations, as we say in my language, dinamaganak. And that doesn't mean just my cousin or my brother or my sister, but it means humanity, and it means all of creation, and in our relationship with the cosmos. So when you think about teaching and learning and student experience, it could, from that perspective, there's a different level of responsibility, because it also means thinking about our ancestors, and how they laid the foundation for our understanding and our existence today, and the responsibility that we have to those children not yet born 7 generations into the future. So there is a lot of responsibility in what we do, with how we engage with each other. on a daily basis. So at some point I'll get to my PowerPoint presentation. So I'm going to share with you a little bit of what we're doing at the University of Saskatchewan, and a little bit about my philosophy of teaching and learning and engaging with students and educational leaders, because it's a whole community that comes together to ensure that we are teaching in a good way. And that's another Indigenous phrase, is in a good way. And so that just really encompasses so much, a little bit of what I described earlier. So from my perspective, and I'm going to draw upon Gregory Kahede's definition. It's not really his definition of schooling, but of education, and it's actually drawn from his research on Indigenous languages in the United States, and it's just a small group of Indigenous languages. And so he went searching for definitions or words that related to schooling and couldn't find any. But the closest that he got to was education. And what he learned is that the essence of education is this phrase, coming to know, right? And so, again, it really is a bit of what I've already explained. It means coming to know ourselves, coming to know our environment and our histories, and the responsibility that we have to children in the future, and to all of humanity. And so in terms of questions that actually evoke that process of coming to know, here are four. Who am I? Where do I come from? Where am I going? What are my responsibilities? And you can call these also existential questions or identity questions or leadership questions. I've used them in many different ways, research questions. And so you can do some a whole strategic framework could actually be developed around these particular questions, because you could ask, who are we? Where are we going? Where do we come from? And what are our responsibilities? And so I should say that I graduated from a small provincial high school here in Saskatchewan from Treaty 4 territory. And my B.Ed I received from University of Calgary, and my M.Ed and Ph.D. I came back to the University of Saskatchewan to work on in the College of Education. And I have moved back to the University of Saskatchewan from the University of Calgary, where I was for 13 years. And again, very much engaged in strategic process or Indigenous strategic processes there, drawing upon these particular questions. So basically, when you're an educator or an educational leader, these are process questions also. And my engagement with, I would say, learning that was drawn from community, outside of the boundary of schools or schooling, began years before I entered the academy. Years before I stepped into the College of Education. And so this particular research project gives you an example of what students can do if the learning is meaningful and connected to those particular questions. And this particular research project began very organically. So it wasn't like in our First Nation community, an adult came to us and said, I want you to find out who you are. And so just a group of high school kids over the summer that came together and asked ourselves, who are we? Where do we come from? And so this whole process of inquiry began, and it grew to where the whole community was involved. And so we as students became connected to the adults and to the elders and traditional knowledge keepers in our community to learn about our collective identity and in our particular history as Saulteaux or Anishinaabe people. And so, as I mentioned in a few different forums, I would say that the mentoring was there from our community and the elders and the adults, but it was a different kind of supervision that we were getting from those particular community members. And so in terms of learning more about our community, as a group of young high school kids, we came, my dad lent me his van. I just freshly got my license. And we all hopped in the van. There were probably about 8 of us, and we heard that there was an archives here at the University of Saskatchewan. And we were looking for pictures and stories that would help us, that would help fill in gaps of what we were hearing in our community. And we also heard that my great-grandfather had lived to be 105, and we wanted to see a picture of him, and we thought maybe there would be one here. And so we traveled here, didn't phone anyone, we just showed up at the archives. And, you know, basically, we were greeted with puzzlement, but also warmly. And so we spent the day at the archives here, and we were so charged by that. We went to University of Regina and sought out an archives there too. So there's a whole story behind this, but really what happened in the end is, as I said, it drew community together. And so even within our settings, how do we engage in searching our histories, in understanding how we got to a particular place, and how do we make that learning journey exciting and one that I think captures and engages the whole university community. So this is something I think I've already alluded to, but research is something that Indigenous peoples have been engaged in, I would say, from time immemorial. And we have been, I think, in some cases, in many cases, that hasn't been acknowledged by the university community. And so our research processes begin with protocols, understanding protocols. One elder says, we visit. And so, you know, we just visit, we listen. And when we visit an elder, you're actively listening, you're astutely observing. And our dissemination is storytelling, right? And so those are valid research processes. And obviously everything in and with and by community. I've only got 5 minutes left. So what I do here is all about, oh, sorry, I misread that. the signals, okay, so I have a little more time. Another thing that we do here at the, I think from my particular perspective, and again, that began at a young age, but just became more and more important as time went on, is what I would call social justice leadership. And as you can see here, the way that I've come to see this is that social justice leadership extends beyond educational institutions to societal ways of doing and being. So there's this questioning of societal values and belief systems. Are they divisive? Are they demeaning? Right, and so social justice, I would say, falls under the realm of decolonization, challenging policies that really are exclusive to certain people, and it also it's really important to engage voice within decision-making circles that are inclusive of Indigenous peoples. And we're, I think increasingly getting to those spaces and enriching our circles with Indigenous voices. And I would also say that it's important within those circles to really ensure that those Indigenous voices are heard. Because sometimes even within those circles, there could be subtle ways of silencing the Indigenous peoples that are sitting in your midst. So again, that's social justice, social action. And I was a part of an international research project early on in my academic career, and so there were 5 universities that were involved from Australia, where the major funding was coming from, and myself and another person from the States. And so basically, we were looking at institutional leadership and how universities were supporting Indigenous faculty, staff, and students and communities. And what we learned is that enduring leadership, and that's a term that we kind of came prominent for this particular group of Indigenous scholars. And Indigenous peoples are so used to short-term relationships. We have teachers come into our communities and stay for 2 years. Until, and then they find something that another larger community to go to. So enduring leadership means that, we really have to be there for the long term. We have to advocate for the long term and develop those long-term relationship. And again, in terms of what we ask ourselves in making transformational systemic change could be these 3 questions. And this is Rosalind Torres that has done extensive research in the area of organizations and leadership. But she said from her perspective, it comes down to these 3 questions. Where are you looking to anticipate the next change to your working model or life? What is the diversity measure of your personal and professional stakeholder network? I find this interesting in light of social media. And we know that in terms of social media, we know what pops up on our screens are determined through algorithms. That means patterns, right? And so really what Google is drawing to you is are like-minded people or like-minded topics. And so how are you going to challenge that and look beyond those particular boundaries? And the last question is, are you courageous enough to abandon a practice that has made you successful in the past? That one requires deep thought, because some people within the academy could say that, but everything is going fine. Why does this boat need to be rocked, right? Let's keep it stable. Status quo is really nice. And so, we're moving that ship closer to the edge, where, historically people thought you'd fall right over. And it may seem like that when you're engaged in this kind of systemic change, and when you're engaged in indigenization, decolonization, and working on reconciliation. And so one of the things also is that it's really important to understand your own demographic. And Saskatchewan, 1 in 10 Indigenous people of all of Canada live in Saskatchewan. And and I think that was one of the things that drew me back home, is even the demographic of the University of Saskatchewan, where we have close to 3,000 Indigenous students. and approximately 200 Indigenous staff, and approximately 50 Indigenous faculty. And so there is, you know, with that growing Indigenous population at all of those levels, you know, there's stuff that's going to be happening here, right? And I wanted to be a part of that energy. And when you think about changing demographics, how are we responding to that, and how are we meeting those needs? And one way is actually going back to story, and some people might be fatigued about let's go to story, but you know, science is showing that there is so much power in story, that we're engaging higher order thinking when we engage in story, that story actually precedes language. And so that is how, you know, Indigenous peoples have never really veered too far from story. And it does require a different kind of listening and a different kind of being in that particular space. And I believe that we're moving into, as I said, steering that ship closer to the edge. We're in terms of data, in research and documents, there's a saturation of findings. So for Indigenous peoples, there could be that impatience as a result of that, saying, as I was, you know, one community in northern Alberta that I'm working with, they're saying, same findings since 1960. Same findings, right? And so let's move into action. We know what's wrong, and let's put those resources into engagement and trying innovative programming, and also along the way celebrating the successes that we've experienced, and some of those successes here. And thank you to Stryker for this information. Is one of the things I like to do is honor all of the people, the hard work of in my case, Indigenous peoples that have made way and just really broke that path in order for me to be here today. And and even with this particular position, I learned that there was years of advocacy for this position, and that there was also years of planning for it. And I learned later that a pipe was lifted at the beginning of the search process. And so, you know, that's again a different way of doing things, perhaps in HR, right, in preparation for a position. And so I think just always honor that process and the people that were involved in that. And so here, in terms of University of, again, an exercise that your universities could be engaged in, but the University of Saskatchewan has had Indigenous people advocate for space and voice, you know, for many, many years. In 1909, James McKay was the first, he sat on our board of governors. And he was a Métis man, a Métis lawyer out of Prince Albert. And I just pulled out various events. So this isn't a comprehensive list, but Edward Ahenakew was the only Aboriginal student from 1910 to 1912, and he came from Sandy Lake. And went to school in a Takakoop First Nation, so that's Star Blanket. And so he was also part of the Indian League in Canada, and published in Cree and in English. And so Annie McKay, Maud McKay, was the very first Aboriginal woman, Métis, who enrolled at the University of Saskatchewan. and she graduated with an English and French degree. And she remained at the University of Saskatchewan for 44 years. She worked in our university library all during that time. An amazing, amazing person. As you could see here, Creva was first offered in 1967. And that the first Canadian Conference on Indian Education was held in 1966. And we also have the Indian Cultural College was established in 1969, and there was a resource project in 1972. In 1973, our Native Law Center was established. And in 1980, President Leo Christensen identified more educational programs for Aboriginal students as a priority for the U of S. And so there has been advocacy over the years. And there still needs to be a lot done. And I'm not in no way dismissing that. And I think in terms of Indigenous engagement, we're only going to strengthen our universities and society in general. And so I think what I'm going to do is just really quickly share with you what I'm excited about at the U of S. And this particular vision was passed in 2015, and it says, we'll be an outstanding institution of research, learning, knowledge-keeping, reconciliation, and inclusion with and by Indigenous peoples and communities. And so because it's stated in our vision, we're accountable to that. I feel that we're accountable to that. And so it's, I feel this responsibility to ensure that this lives within the university in one way or another. And another thing that has emerged over the time in our university plan, which will be launched in September, and it's already passed through Senate and Council, is this particular weave. And you can see a weave in, weave can be seen in many different ways, whether it's a beaded belt or a Métis sash, or, we've just heard so many examples of what people see in this particular weave. But one of our goals is to uplift indigenization, and there's descriptors and guideposts for that, and there will be metrics, so it will be measured. And the other one is experiencing reconciliation with descriptors and guideposts, and there will be metrics. And the third one is embracing Manachituan, not translated into English. That's a Cree word, embracing Manachituan, which means respecting each other. And there are descriptors and guideposts, and there will be metrics for that also. And then the next question is, what is the metaphor that we're going to use to inform how we live within university? And there's different metaphors that could be used, and these three are just examples. And the very last thing here is, when I was asked, and I've been asked this particular question over the years, is, okay, so with indigenization and reconciliation and decolonization, okay, so how do you see if everything is going right, or the way that, how would it look 10 years from now? And for me, indigenization is drawing from Indigenous knowledges, worldviews, lived experiences. And decolonization, as I mentioned, are those challenging forces. And reconciliation, I believe, happens when those other two are engaged. And so another exercise that could be done in your circles, how do you envision that? Right? And so these were just 8 that I came up with when I was just deeply thinking about this. But I'll just point out number 2, where it says the stories told will be vastly different. Embedded in them will be possibility, hope, strength. So we're changing our narrative. And I think that's, again, a very, very ongoing, it's not an event, it's a process. And I envision this particular place as being the epicenter of indigenization and reconciliation. And if you see your particular school and university as those, what are the actions that you will undertake in order to make that a reality? Well, thank you for the time, and just really appreciate visiting and in listening and being a part of this particular conference. Gitche miigwech.